Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural fantasy and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Evil, Season 4, Episode 9. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So the main crux of this episode revolves around a chatbot, obviously kind of dealing with like the AI of it all, and how that is kind of used in this regard, how it seems like it's something that's possessed. We don't connect this to Leland and them, but it might be. You'd assume all evil that exists in this universe. I mean, it's hard to say, like, well, are they responsible for all evil? But, I mean, as the series is going on, we've kind of realized, like, Leland and his associates, DF and everything, have had their grubby little paws in a lot of stuff. So, even though there was no direct correlation to them, the fact is we get the other side of this episode revolving around DF feels like it's there, but any demonic stuff tends to be related to there. But either way, this chatbot AI is, well, demonically possessed. It's actually sadder introduction to the episode of like that storyline, because it's Father Ignatius being contacted by Matt, and it's just how heartbreaking that is. And he's obviously been dealing with that grief this season. Obviously, everything with the Sister Andrea's helped a lot in that regard, to the point he thought she was behind the chatbot thing initially, because he was like, oh, like, is this some form of like grief counseling? But she had nothing to do with it. But it turns out, it is a fake, because it's outdated information. It's basically taking stuff from like emails and like any AI, it's amalgamating a lot of stuff, that it's taking all this information and kind of amalgamating it. And it involves, so David, Kristen, and Ben obviously investigate, and each one of them eventually has their own experience with the app. Obviously, David uses Julia, and Kristen uses initially Andy, but then David, which fits so perfectly, because that's very like, that encompasses like Kristen's life to an extent. I mean, her story so far in this entire show is just like, that is just the personification of that, and just like the antithesis of a lot of her complicated relationship with like the whole Andy and David at all. Like, she talked a little bit with Andy, but immediately talked to David. I mean, she says later on, it's like, well, Andy doesn't believe in the God and devil, but you do, so it's like you could have probably picked someone else. But it's like, well, the people you're closest to know whether this is out of character for them, it would make sense to be David, because Ben's just like you. He's very like non-religious and stuff like that, which is interesting considering like, who does Ben use? Well, Ben didn't choose this, his sister did, but used their mom. It's interesting because Ben's the only one that had the experience he did, because it's like, well, let's start off with Ben then, since I'm on that conversation. It's like, they do it is that thing of, they haven't heard their mom's voice in so long, and the way she's like, oh, she's telling them to stop arguing and they should pray and stuff like that. And it's like, man, it feels like we're 12 years old again. And she suggested, like, right, when your dad had his migraines, he went to this particular doctor. But it's like, right, mom wouldn't know that. She died in 2017. Like, this is an advertisement, isn't it? And the moment he does that, he says that the chat stops. It doesn't respond after that, which, considering the way the episode plays out, it's hard to say what that means. Either it's like, hey, it said what it needed to say, and you being the non-believer that you are, but it's also like, oh, it does seem like it is a paid advertisement in that regard. I mean, because once you kind of call something out for being what it is, like, usually those, like, oh, when someone's trying to, like, when you're trying to be catfished or something, the moment you call someone out, or when it's an automatic machine being like, oh no, I'm a real person, the moment you call it out is when it immediately shuts down. So it feels, so that could also be the truth in this regard too. But Ben does later on go to that same doctor's place. Granted, it's in his fugue state, which has gotten worse and worse. Kurt suggested, like, right, anytime you feel the headache coming on, or you smell like popcorn, which is usually a telltale sign before things pop off, no pun intended, he has to, well, also kind of pun intended, pop himself with a rubber band to snap out of it. But it doesn't seem like that helped, because he still went into his fugue states. To the point he went shopping for a hat and he has like tinfoil on. He thought he went shopping for it, but we later on find out it's like, oh, he went to that particular doctor, the same one his mom suggested. So you're like, was that just an advertisement that ultimately did help you? I mean, even though you're being sold something, sometimes said advertisement can benefit you and it could be something you want or need. So it's hard to say. But, I mean, it all worked out in the end. Granted, Ben feels a little crazy because now it's like, right, I'm wearing a tinfoil hat, and just to cover that up, I'm wearing a hat now so no one knows. And he's not explaining any of this to Ben or Dave. I mean, Ben's not explaining this to Kristen or David because he doesn't want them making fun of him, which I'm like, David wouldn't, because like David's a man of faith, and it's kind of the same thing of like, well, what works for you works for you. Kristen probably wouldn't. It's like, well, she probably look at it as more like a placebo effect, because they recognize like, okay, putting tinfoil on did actually help you with your migraine. So I don't think they'd make fun of him, but you know. But it's understandable why you're just gonna go, yeah. I'm assuming Ben just for the rest of this series is just going to like wear that at. I'm curious to see if that ends up being the case or not. But also now he also sleep in aluminum foil, so like that's interesting. Oh, not aluminum foil, but tin foil, whatever the case may be. It's the same thing, but yeah, he's gonna have to start sleeping in that now, and it does seem like it is helping. It does. Well, he still saw the gin even when he had the tin foil on, but you know, we'll see. Given enough time, this might be what's necessary to stop all of this. Who knows? Whether it will persist or not, what the solution to that will be. But for now, it kind of gave Ben a little respite. Let's go work our way backwards, and let's work with Kristen, who the David bot started getting all sexual, which I was like, yo, things are getting hot and steamy. It's like, yo, because you know, like, I mean, Kristen's admitted being attracted to David, so it's like hearing him say all this stuff that, like, you probably would only hear in your fantasies, which is so interesting considering, like, you're kind of experiencing what David's already kind of experienced with that fake Kristen already. So funny enough, because she does pop up at the end of the near the end of the episode, so it is kind of interesting for the shoe to be on the other foot with Kristen having to deal with that. And she kind of had to shut that down because she was like, right, you're just trying to keep me on the app or whatever. But it's like, it was kind of working because it's like, right, hearing David say all that type of stuff. I mean, he was like, as she says, like, really sexting David? It's like, yeah. And it was kind of working, and that was what bothered her the most. But then, you know, later on, her camera turns on by itself, and then David says some, like, horrendous stuff. Because this is all supposed to be, like, what kind of jumpstarts a lot of the possession stuff or the demonic stuff is 4 keywords, which ended up being Jesus, Pillow, and Michael Bay, which I'm like, I don't know, if, like, I'm sure it's like, wow, shots fired at Michael Bay for any reason. I'm like, I don't know, you could have picked any name and you decided to pick Michael Bay. Because I guess it's meant to be the funniest, being like, oh, I don't know if that's supposed to, I don't know what, like, there's ways you can interpret that, but I'm like, maybe just Michael Bay was like the funniest name they chose because they were like, oh, it's because it's meant to be funny in a dark way. So, like, because even Ben was like, seriously? Like, because it's like, Jesus and Pillow was like, okay, Jesus makes sense. Pillow, okay. I guess you can make the correlation because of sex and whatever, because you associate pillow with sleeping and you have sex in your bed. Well, not always, but, you know, typically you associate the bed with, like, sleeping and having sex, but still. But then there's, like, the Michael Bay of it. I'm like, I felt like that was what Ben was like, seriously? It's like, yeah, but apparently. And I felt so bad for Kristen when she had to report this to the guys, and they're like, "Oh, so what name did you use?" She's like, "What? I don't think that's important. Oh, maybe she'll read the chat logs. I deleted it. Don't worry, we keep a copy of it." So she had to pull David aside, being like, "Yeah, so I used you. Things got sexual," and then they play the messages loud as hell. I was like, "Oh," Kristen's like, "Okay, we can fast forward. Like, don't you have like a search function because it's much later in the conversation?" David's like, "Is that what I sound like?" It's gotta be kind of weird. Especially, once again, David has his feelings towards Kristen too, so it's gotta be a little weird, like the will they won't they of their relationship, which they won't, but still it's there, that tension. You know, so I felt so bad for Kristen in that moment. I was like, oh, that's got to be so embarrassing. Because it's like, right, this is your friend. I mean, granted, they laugh about it later, you know, but still, it's still kind of awkward. But at least, granted, you don't want Andy to find out about that. Because if he did, it's like, well, Andy already kind of threw it in your face, or at least in David's face, believing, like, there's something going on between you when there kind of is, but kind of isn't. So that's a whole thing. And then going back to David, he has Julia, and it goes beyond the others because at least Ben and Kristen stopped at the computer. Julia calls him, and for him it almost feels like he is talking to her. I mean, that's what this is all about. It's about being, because that's a real tool that, I mean, this isn't like out of nowhere. This is a real tool that has been used in life. I remember Twitter was like messing around with it for a bit, where you can like basically like interact with someone on social media. I haven't followed the technology. Like, this was a couple years ago. I haven't followed the technology, so I don't even know where it's at and who's utilizing it. But I do remember Twitter was at one point utilizing it. I don't know if that ever came to fruition or if that's still something in the works. But I remember that from a few years ago. Like I said, I just haven't followed the technology enough to know where that currently stands. If that's something that maybe the service does actually exist already in some shape or form, or like some other companies are using it, I'm just not aware of it. Whatever the case may be. But yeah, like David goes to his phone, because it's hard to say, like, he said, I didn't give you permission to use my phone, and she was like, yeah, you did. So, but it's still that nice thing of like, right, it sounds like her. And he's like, oh, this isn't, you're not talking like you. But then he's like, well, actually, you actually are kind of talking like you. She's like, yeah, I was the one that was full of faith. You becoming a priest is kind of ironic. And it's like, most likely, well, not most likely, definitely losing her and everything, the way things went down. It's like, of course, it's going to, you're going to find religion. It's like, I mean, sometimes like when you've hit your pseudo rock bottom, that's when people can find their faith the most typically. So I think that's what happened to David. But for him, it's just like, right, you're not real. But she was like, yeah, turn on your camera and turn on the mirror function. And there's that filter, because there's filters like that in real life where it's just like, oh, like, I was watching a video, it's like the prank where it's like, oh, you show the filter to someone and it's just like this guy pops up behind your shoulder. It's very pretty much that same technology. So, because I know there's a version of that like that with Shrek, I believe. I mean, I think it's the same technology, just different things used in the filter. So I was like, oh, that's creepy and unnerving. So the resolution to this makes me kind of feel like, I mean, leans into it even more, being like, oh yeah, this is all about this this being part of the DF situation, because the ethics people who are working to try and like work through the kinks of this stuff were fired because the main last connections decided to go ahead and put the app on the market because there were already other services like this and they didn't want to miss their window. So regardless of all of this, and the guy who was the main guy in charge of like the ethics side of the business was like, yeah, my advice to you is delete the app immediately. So, and everyone does. David did get one last unknown call after deleting the app. I thought that was interesting because I was like, well, what if it ends up being someone else? But it's like, yeah, but he ignored it because Julie was begging him. It's like, do not do this. If you get rid of it, you will be lost forever. The fact of the matter is, and that's the sad thing. It is just manipulating them. It isn't the real people they care about talking to, because obviously Kristen is talking to David, and that's, it's all bullshit, but it's still the thing of, you can see how much it affected them all to delete these, because like there's still a tug each and every one of them felt towards, this service, because it kind of gave them, it ended up being bullshit, but I think it was still a necessary closure in a lot of weird ways, especially for David with Julia. Like, I think it did give him some closure, because she was like, it wasn't your fault, there's nothing you could have done. I felt trapped. I felt like nothing was going to work. I felt like a burden. So it's like, nothing you could have done have changed that, I mean, even that sweet thing of like, oh, how many kids will we have by now? She's like, oh, 30. And he's like, oh, you sure not 40? She's like, yeah, some cats, some dogs, some horses, this and that, maybe one or two humans. It was kind of a nice moment while it lasts. But for David, it's like, that was the pure evil of it, taking something so sweet and manipulating and pulling on his heartstrings like that. So I mean, that ending is kind of really interesting too. Them, all three of them together, and David's kind of like, all you can do is go with the flow of things, and they're kind of like, really? Like, I wasn't expecting a priest to have that perspective. And David kind of brought up something I thought was interesting, where he's like scientists and like people of that ilk who come from like the science perspective, they want everything to fit inside of a box of like, this is how this works. They kind of want to explain everything. He's like, because the whole conversation was about like, oh, the world's gotten weirder lately. It's like, no, the world's always been weird. It's just you're kind of more apparent, like more aware of it now, kind of. And David's like, yeah, but everyone wants, like, scientists and stuff like that want some normalcy because they want to be able to explain everything. But he's like, yeah, like, but David's like, yeah, but priests and religious people, we just kind of always seen the world as weird and kind of realize that is kind of its normal, you know? So we kind of learn to kind of go along with it. And even David's like, honestly, like, I've been feeling like the most normal I've ever felt for the first time after these several weeks. I would assume that include everything they've been through over the course of the season so far. Like, I think, like I said, I think there was something cathartic about all of this. I mean, still being played by, like, you know, fake Kristen, who was like, ooh, good choice by turning away Julia. And he ends up calling up Ben and Kristen to hang out. It's like, well, there's going to be like a tornado coming and a hurricane. So it's like, oh, you know. And then, like, you hear the storm happening outside. It's like, yeah, kind of being like, the end of days, the end of time is coming. Because that also plays into the DF stuff. So, let's switch over to that. We have Leland with his fucking knife phone. Interesting. And a giant blade hidden in his suitcase. You have Cheryl coming to work with knife-proof armor on, essentially. So there's that. And then there's the whole situation with Cheryl pulling the trigger on her coup with the ladies, and I love that. They literally broke the glass ceiling. Glass floor for the men, glass ceiling for Cheryl's office. But I love them falling through, and that one last guy wasn't paying attention, and he just like literally fell. It's like, they're not dead, they're probably injured. One of the beams kind of fell and landed on the dude's crotch or whatever, so. And now they're presenting it to, like, the manager, like, oh my god, like, we have these demands, we want Leland fired, and eventually he comes to Cheryl, who's enjoying, like, the glass ceiling being broken in her office. And then I love the knife twist where she's like, Leland had the Antichrist baptized. I was like, yo! Interesting. So not only did you save your grandchild, but you also kind of threw Leland under the bus. So now he ends up getting let go. But he doesn't want to go without a fight because he's like, oh, this is all going according to plan. I'm like, how the fuck are you going to twist this around? The literal Antichrist got baptized. So how are you going to work your way around that? I mean, it wasn't his fault. He didn't let it happen, but he kind of let it happen. That was all Cheryl, but still. His justification for it is, right, evil isn't by birth. He's like, right, evil is more so nurtured. And I was like, oh, that's interesting for evil to have that perspective. Evil, true evil. Sure, you could be a little evil from the beginning at birth, but like true evil is learned. And it's like, who's the perfect person to raise him? And I love the manager's like, Cheryl? She's like, no, that, like, just like, no, that woman couldn't nurture anything. No. It's Kristen. It's like, we're talking about the woman who's lost her faith in God, who cheated, who kind of just like the fake David was calling her, like the whore of Babylon. We have the same thing here. Or was it Leland who called her the whore of Babylon? They were kind of both kind of toting that same thought process, so it definitely kind of adds even more validity that lost or last connections or whatever is connected to DF in some shape or form. But despite that, Leland gets the boot, but he doesn't go down without a fight because he, in fact, poisons and kills the manager. In fact, in front of everybody, he's like, oh my god, look at this birth certificate. I mean, this, not birth certificate, this, baptismal, certificate. Oh, look at this signature. And then it was hooves, and it's like, oh, he's like, what did you do to me? He's like, I poisoned you. What do you think? I poisoned you. So, and then proceeds to cut him open, rip out his heart, and eat it. So now he's kind of in control of everything, which, you know, is all Leland wanted. It's like, right, if you're not going to listen, like, I'm the real one running the show. I put in so much work. I've had to answer to you. And it's like the women and Cheryl got the one up on me. Nah, I'm going to be the one that comes out on top. And the moment this all started popping off, Cheryl runs for her life, interestingly enough. So she's like, now he's got control. I don't know what that means for the ladies at the company now. They're probably going to get the boot. Either they're going to get fired, and fired can mean they legitimately just lose their job, but there's also the possibility of losing their lives. I'm curious to see what Cheryl does, because I don't know if she knows that Leland plans on getting Kristen to look after Timothy or not. Because they were moving on to another child, John, to be the true Antichrist, but it's like, no. Timothy's it. We just got to get him back to Kristen, and, well, because also Cheryl's got to run for her life because she took a swing at, Leland took a swing at her and missed multiple times. I mean, he even tried to stab her this episode, didn't go through. Now she took her big swing on him. This was her moment. This was her coup, and it backfired. And now Leland's not only still here, he's running the show. I mean, who else does he really like answer to now that the manager? Because he's top brass. I mean, the big boss is, you know, the devil himself, but here on Earth, the manager was kind of the one running things. So now that Leland's kind of taking that position, I'm sure he's going to be taking more direct orders from the big evil man himself. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all this takes us. Once again, there's technically 4 episodes, well, isn't it 5 episodes after this? Because there's like what could have been like the season finale / series finale, but then there's also bonus episodes, which I'm getting to this extremely late. So episode 12 is out and episode 13 comes out tomorrow at the time of me recording this. I'm excited to see where this goes. Once again, I don't know about the bonus episodes. I don't know if it is an actual continuation or were they just extra episodes that were filmed that they're going to be almost like random episodes, or will they continue the narrative and like properly wrap everything up? Like I said, some places were labeling it as technically a 4-episode 5th season, but really they're being lumped in as part of season. I don't know. Well, I won't know until we get to the actual episodes, but I'm curious to see what was originally potentially going to be the season finale, maybe even series finale, how that plays out with this the next episode, what that entails, how that plays out, what the end result's going to be, and like I said, how that leads into the final 4 episodes as well. We'll have to wait to see. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.